if I get scared on the air, it's because, holy cow, this is a big freaking deal.
Right.
And I've only had one time when I was scared on the air because there was a verified tornado. It was coming across north side of Tallahassee, and it had basically crossed over Meridian Road, and it was headed in the direction of Thomasville Road. I could tell by looking at radar that this was maybe a half a mile from my house, but I'm at work. I can't call my family because I'm live on the air. So on air, I said, anybody out there that knows my wife, can you please just call her and make sure that they're all huddled up in the hallway because this is going to be really close to our house. She got like 10 phone calls within a minute.
Yeah.
And so, but even now I get a little choked up thinking about that.
Very helpless, right?
I had to help my family, but I'm helping everybody else too at the same time. So the best way that I had to do that was on the air say, please call them, make sure they're safe, and then I moved on.
Yeah.
I don't have time to take a 2-minute break and call my family when there are other families that are just as much dangerous.
Yeah. From Fiore Communications, it's How I Got Here, a show of inspiring stories from Tallahassee area leaders, business owners, and neighbors. All the challenges, opportunities, inspirations, the twists and turns of life that led them to where they are today. Everyone has a story worth telling, and I am really grateful that we get to bring a few of them to you. I truly have been changed by my conversations with these amazing people, and I'm confident you will be too. I'm Dave Fiore, and in this episode I speak with Mike McCall, Chief Meteorologist at WCTV, a position he has held for more than 30 years. Mike caught the weather bug in 1977 at age 12 when a legitimate snow blanketed his hometown of Tampa, and he says everyone lost their minds. To encourage his interest, his mom arranged a trip to a local TV station where Mike met the man who would offer him a job a decade later after he earned his meteorology degree from Florida State. Another lifelong passion was ignited around the same time when Mike noticed an employee air drumming to the thumping music at a local skating rink. He got a snare drum the next Christmas, started taking lessons, and was soon rocking out to Van Halen and Styx. Mike's love of percussion paid off in other ways as well, as it led him to the FSU Marching Chiefs, where he met his wife Mallory on the Big 8 drumline. Mike shares candidly about the emotional stress of his profession, being wrong sometimes, and dealing with the helpless feeling of being right, but knowing people are still going to get hurt. Finally, Mike talks about his dreams for the future, which include staying in front of the green screen during the week and maybe finding a gig in an 80s cover band on the weekends. We began our conversation talking about how he would describe himself today.
From a professional sense, if they ask, what do I do? I could say I'm a broadcast meteorologist, but that sounds kind of stuffy. And so most people would just look at it and say, no, you're a TV weatherman. I'm okay with that. Now, I'm proud of my degree, and I am a meteorologist, but it sounds a little full of yourself sometimes when you say that. So I would say I'm a TV weatherman, and I love what I do, and I get to be a weather nerd, and they pay me to do it. So now if they were asking me, just about myself, then it would be about what a great family I have, my 3 sons and my wife, and a great life that just includes this fact that I'm a weather nerd and they pay me to do that. So it's a good combination for me. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, that sounds great. So let me ask you about that. The term weatherman, that's gender specific. So is that did you say forecaster or what's about weatherman?
That's a good point because the profession has changed so much. If you watch in any market, it's getting to be pretty equal now with male and female on air and good meteorologists. Now, you go back to the 50s and 60s, most were not meteorologists. It was definitely male dominated, but they were kind of half weather information, half entertainment. And so that's kind of the reputation they got. People like Willard Scott, who at one time was Ronald McDonald. So
So he's not a meteorologist?
Oddly enough, he's not. But
How about Al Roker? Don't tell me Al Roker.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a degree.
Right.
But, now some of them that don't have the degree really dive into the science and become really good at what they do. Now, those of us that had to endure calculus and atmospheric dynamics and those kinds of classes, we all say, that's great, you're not a meteorologist, but you can call yourself a forecaster, you can call yourself a weatherman. We just, again, it's an inside the business thing that we get all uppity about, where someone doesn't have a degree in meteorology shouldn't be able to call themselves meteorologists.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't do it in some other science.
No.
So you shouldn't be able to do it in meteorology either.
Right. But on-air weather script reader doesn't have the same ring to it.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is that so much of the people back then might have had other people prepare stuff for them. Now, mostly in big markets, which is odd because you think those are the people that should be the best. And they're the best in front of the camera, but most of the time they're the ones that had someone else. I wouldn't say most of the time. From my knowledge, a lot of the time they had someone else preparing everything for them.
Right.
But then they got to go out in front of the camera. I don't know if any of their stuff was scripted, but our stuff is completely ad lib. So
Because you know what you're talking about.
Right. And you spend the afternoon preparing for that, making the graphics, preparing your own forecast. That's how I get the information in my head. I could never have somebody come in and just make all my graphics and do the forecast, and then I just get in front of the camera because I wouldn't have a feel at all for what's going on. I need to do all that work ahead of time that kind of builds the information, the story, the weather story in my head.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, I have more questions about that, but I'm going to get to those later when we get to your career, and because I'm fascinated by that whole world there. All right, so let's start at the beginning with you. You grew up in Tampa, right? So tell us about your family growing up, your parents, siblings. What was your family life like as a kid?
I'd say we were the ultimate nuclear family. 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I have an older sister. We lived in a very modest part of Tampa called Town and Country, but it was a great place to grow up as a kid. We were talking earlier before the show started about reminiscing about how things were, but it was the place where I'd get on my bike, and I had some friends that lived on the other side of Hillsborough Avenue. Hillsborough Avenue kind of divides Town and Country down the middle, and north of that, they all went to one particular school, and south of that, they all went to a different school. But we were all Town and Country people, and so one of my best friends lived about 3 or 4 miles away, but it was nothing to hop on my bike and ride to his house. Across Hillsborough Avenue, which now you wouldn't do that without a truck. But
Yeah.
As a kid, that's just how it was. I actually wasn't far from the water. As far as the drive goes, you could get to Ben T. Davis Beach, which isn't the nicest beach in Tampa, but it's a beach.
Right.
I could probably get there by car in 15 minutes. We usually went to Clearwater Beach as a teenager. That was the beach everybody went to.
Right.
But I wasn't close enough to where water was a big thing. Even though it was close, I was more of a kid that just hung out in his neighborhood, played basketball, on the hoop on the road, that kind of thing, playing touch football in the street. It really was what I think people wish times were like. I kind of feel that's what it was like in the 70s for me growing up.
Right.
We certainly had our problems, but as a kid, you don't know what those are and don't care.
Right.
My dad worked for Schlitz Brewery in Tampa.
I didn't know there was a Schlitz brewery in Tampa.
It was actually right down the street from the Budweiser plant there at Busch Gardens.
Yeah.
On 30th Street, if you were to go another 2 miles down the road, there was another brewery that was Schlitz. And so, and the weird thing is I still to this day don't like beer. I've never liked it. I as a teenager, I tried to like it because everyone else did.
Right.
But I gave up on it long ago. I'm not going to like the taste of it. So, but anyway, as a kid, it was a neat trip. It was kind of on the other side of town from where we lived, but they had a Christmas party every year there. They had a little kind of a bar for employees that was open all the time. Like on your lunch break, I guess you could go in and have a beer because you're at a brewery. So
Did you know what he did when you were a kid?
I knew he did something with payroll. I didn't really know what it was. I know that he wrote lots of numbers down, and this is at a time when there were time cards that were punch cards.
Right.
Yeah. But some of the payroll stuff he did was these cards that fed into a computer that actually had the little holes punched out that you would feed into it, and it would read stuff. But
right.
I was 10, so
not that worried about it.
Right. I thought it was cool that I just got to go visit Dad, and we would go eat at Master Pizza, which was the pizza joint down the road.
Yeah.
That was the big treat, to go visit my dad on Fridays when he got done with work, and the family would all go to Master Pizza.
That sounds like a great memory.
It was.
Yeah.
That was a big deal to go out. We didn't go out to eat a lot. Rarely did anything interfere with that Friday night going to visit grandfather and uncle and have the whole family just kind of sit around and talk.
That's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, you went to Jefferson High School. You mentioned there were 2 high schools that kids from your neighborhood went to, but you went to Jefferson, right? I looked it up. Jefferson has some pretty amazing alumni. I couldn't believe the Bob Martinez, Fred McGriff, which is around your time, right? Did you know Fred McGriff?
He was just a couple of years older than me.
Okay.
My sister is 3 years older, so I think he was in the same class as she was, probably the class of 80,
okay,
roughly, and I was a class of 83. So, but really known for baseball.
Yeah.
Pop Questo.
Tons of MLB players on the alumni list.
I was always an average baseball player. I loved the sport, but when I got to high school age, I realized if I made the team, there was virtually no chance I'd ever see the field because they were that good. It's
right.
just, and I was realistic.
Did you try out?
I did not, because by that time I was playing a lot more tennis.
Okay.
And I thought I have a much better chance of not only making the tennis team but playing and having fun than watching some great players play baseball while I shag them in the outfield and
have a good seat to watch them every day, right?
Yeah, that's how it would be.
So you played tennis?
I did. I played a fair amount of that growing up. I played literally every sport I could get my hands on, except for probably tackle football. That was the one thing that I didn't play. But I played YMCA basketball for a year. Played tennis from probably the time I was 11 or 12. Loved to fish. That's not a sport, but
well, some would say it is.
All right, yeah, but that was another great memory too, where going to the only professional sports we had were the Rowdies, and we had minor league baseball. We had the Tampa Tarpons,
right,
which were the farm team for the Cincinnati Reds. So
the Yankees weren't there yet.
No, the Tampa Yankees. The Yankees were in Fort Lauderdale at the time.
Okay,
as part of the Florida State League. That's where they did their spring training.
Right,
but I got to go see the Reds spring training in the mid-'70s. So it was
big
a
red machine.
It was. I'm still a Reds fan somewhat to this day just because of those memories as a kid.
Yeah. All right. So based on something we'll get to in a few minutes, I assume you were in the band in high school as well.
I was. And my life in high school was basically band, tennis, and a girlfriend sometimes, thrown in the mix. But it was usually a band-related girlfriend.
Sure.
Because that's how band people roll.
It is.
And it's extremely common. If you know anyone that's in band, they marry band people a lot of the time.
Sure.
But I started playing drums. Actually, the thing that kind of got me interested in a weird way was I was at a skating rink, and I saw a guy air drumming. And I thought it was a cool thing, and I'd never seen anybody air drum before.
Okay.
and so it's like, that's cool. He's playing the drums, and there's nothing there. And I don't know why that clicked in my head, but I kind of wanted to learn, what he was doing.
So I just want to get this in my head. He's skating around.
Oh, no. This was just kind of standing.
Okay.
We were kind of standing at the entrance where you go on to the
right.
Onto
and the music
rink.
Is blaring.
Right. The loud music. And
right.
I think it was
Don't say Phil Collins.
No, this was before that.
Okay.
I think it was I think it was Cold as Ice by Foreigner. There's a part toward the beginning where it goes dum 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 dot, and he air drummed that part.
Yep.
And I don't know why that memory sticks in my head, but I can picture. And this was one of the little skate referee guys. And he was just kind of standing there, and he loved that drum part and air drummed it. And so, flash forward another year or two, and I get a snare drum for Christmas, which I don't know what my parents were thinking.
No, it's the worst toy ever.
We lived in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house that was probably 1,200 square feet, and they bought me a drum.
Yeah.
But they said that if I wanted to, if I wanted a drum setting, those kinds of things, I had to take lessons. I had to learn the instrument.
Right.
That way, if I hated it after 3 months, they didn't lose that big investment.
Sure.
So I just played along.
Best?
It was I played a lot of Van Halen and Styx.
Okay. Van Halen's not easy. I don't even know if you know this about me, but I'm a drummer too. I played drums, although I started in 6th grade, played all through high school, and played as an adult later. And
See, I did not know that. I only know you in your Marching Chiefs instrument day.
Yes, in my French horn roll. But
Right.
I also played the drums for my church praise team for years and all that. But I started in 6th grade. I was not allowed to play when my dad came home. That was the rule. I had to play before he got home from work. And I would just put up my little record player right next to my drum set, and Boston was my go-to, or Journey or something, and I would just play along. But Alex Van Halen, he can play.
Oh, it's in my head, because I had headphones on, so I kind of sounded like what they were playing, but
now Rush was the ultimate test.
See, and the weird thing is that when I first started, I hadn't heard Rush. It wasn't until I got to high school when I heard my first Rush song that kind of stuck with me. And then one of my best friends that was in the drumline at Jefferson High School bought me a double live album, All the World's a Stage by Rush. And then I was hooked. Yeah. And then that was what I played on my set with the headphones on 95% of the time, was just finding Rush songs. When a new Rush album came out, I'd sit and play every song on that over and over and over.
All right, so you played tennis, were in the band, you had the occasional girlfriend. Was that kind of wrap up your high school time? Is that kind of how you spent your time?
Pretty much. I mean, I was a good student. It's if you measure, your friends in high school by what they did later in life. I was in the smart kid crowd, I guess, but I wasn't one of the smartest kids by any stretch. But I kind of felt like it was, I loved my time in band so much that was my crowd.
Right.
I had my friends, and most of the kids that were, ended up being professors and those kinds of things. I was still good friends with them, but I spent all of my free time, high school related, into some kind of a band activity.
Sure. All right, so how did you get to FSU? What was your path to Tallahassee?
It probably started because I'd have to backtrack several years where something else did start to enter into my that's really cool life, which was when it snowed in Tampa. It snowed in Tampa January 19th, 1977. And that's still pretty much the last time that it legit snowed in Tampa.
Right, so collected on the ground, real snow.
Right. It might have been less than a half inch, but it made everything white, and it was snow, and people lost their minds. It was fantastic. So it snowed then, and something kind of went off in my head. This was the coolest thing ever to see it snow. Now, I've already been, as a kid, having to deal with the Central Florida afternoon thunderstorms, which seemed like they happened every day.
Seemed like it.
At least in the summertime when you're out playing every day. So it was kind of cool. I'd watch the thunderstorms develop out to the east, and they would move toward Tampa almost every afternoon. But it wasn't until it snowed that I thought, weather is really cool. I want to find out why this happened. And so at the library, I'd check out a weather book and just kind of read some stuff about weather. And so my mom saw that I was really interested in weather, so she called the TV station, Channel 13 in Tampa, which was the king of news back then. And she called and said, my son has a real interest in weather. Would he be able to come in and talk to your weather department and, just kind of get a feel for what it's all about?
Yeah.
And the chief meteorologist at the time was Roy Leap, who was, if Channel 13 was the king, then Roy Leap was the emperor. I mean, he was...
I haven't thought about that name in forever, but as soon as you said his name, I remember him.
Yeah. I mean, he was the weather star
right.
in Tampa by far. And he said, sure. And so my mom and I went to Channel 13. I was probably about 12, and I got to go to the weather center and sat in the office with Roy Leap, and he gave me this little packet of old weather maps and satellite pictures and hurricane tracking map, and stuck it all in a folder for me, and I was on cloud nine. It was fantastic. And one of the questions that we addressed was, what did he suggest I do as far as if I wanted to continue studying weather? And he had been in the Air Force, and then he actually went to FSU, but then was offered a job at Channel 13 in Tampa. And so he left FSU before he finished his degree because he had a great job offer.
Yeah.
And then he was there for 40 years.
Wow.
So it worked out well for him.
Yeah.
So he said, that's the path that he took, and he thought those were two great options of going in the Air Force and be a weather officer and get some fantastic training there, or go to a school like FSU. Mm-hmm. So that's where I ended up going to FSU and getting that degree in meteorology. When I graduated, tried to get that first job, but for the most part, you just had to get lucky. And we didn't have a chroma key wall at FSU. We had a room where we had a map with plexiglass on it that we used magic markers on and drew fronts and those kinds of things, and had this camera, and that's what weathercasting was.
Better than a felt board, though, I guess.
Not much, but we had a weathercasting class, and we practiced. So it ended up being a great starting ground. I had the education, I just didn't have the TV experience. And
right.
So it was really tough to get a job anywhere. Enough so that I was living in Tampa. My girlfriend was here, and so in Tallahassee. So I was going to move back to Tallahassee just to get a job, to pay bills, and keep applying for whatever TV station I could find. And the week before I was set to move, I got a phone call that said, hey, we'd like to talk to you about coming in and maybe being a weather producer for us. And the phone call was from Roy Leap, who I'd met when I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And the job was at Channel 13 in Tampa, WTVT, to be a weather producer. And to say that I was floored would be an understatement.
Wow.
To get that, even to go back and... So yes, I interviewed, obviously, and I said, I know you don't remember this, but...
I was going to ask if you asked him. Yeah.
I did. And he was polite. He had no recollection of it all, because it had been 10 years earlier.
Right.
But so he ended up offering me the job as a weather producer. And so I got to stay living in Tampa. And it was only a little bit of on-air. The shift was actually Saturday and Sunday mornings. This is when stations signed off at night.
Right. And the color bars would come on the TV.
Right.
Yep.
And at 6 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday mornings at 6, they'd sign on, play the national anthem, and then they would show radar, because they had their own radar, was one of the first stations to do that. And then at 6:15, they would do this little weather segment from inside the weather office. That's what this job was going to be. So it wasn't in the studio. There was no newscast.
Okay.
It was in the weather center. There was this camera that was remotely activated from master control there in the station. I mean, one of my worst memories, weather-wise, as far as bad weather that happens, when I worked in Tampa, was the freeze of Christmas of 1989, where it got down into the low to mid-20s in the groves in Central Florida. And I remember talking to farmers on the phone, and literally they were heartbroken because there was nothing more they could do. It had reached a point to where some groves would actually use they had trenches and they would flood the grove because the water wouldn't freeze.
Right.
And it would lose enough heat to keep the trees warmer than surrounding air. For all the hits that you get as far as getting things right in meteorology, you remember the misses, and the public certainly remembers the misses.
Yeah.
They do not remember when you get it right. They definitely remember when you get it wrong.
I'm sure. And we'll be right back. How I Got Here is sponsored by Barano Heating and Air Conditioning in Tallahassee. I've been friends with Patrick Barano since we met in a chamber leads group about 15 years ago. I'll admit that I pursued him pretty hard to be his marketing firm and eventually won him over. And the reason I wanted to work with him is that I was already a customer and I knew what kind of company he and his father before him had built. He cares about his customers, he cares about his team, and he cares about this community. I've experienced Barano Heating and Air when they installed a complete system replacement a few years ago, and I enjoy peace of mind and same-day service with my Total Comfort Service Agreement. I've also been behind the scenes at their office and seen firsthand the true character of this company. And that's why we're so proud to represent them. To learn more or to schedule an appointment online anytime, visit baranoac.com. They really always will be there for you. And now back to the show. So just like you mentioned, morning tornadoes, the ones we had here, a few months ago, I don't think they were predicted to be as dramatic and as impactful as they actually were, right? Or did we know those were coming?
The outlook certainly called for a threat. There definitely was the risk. The Storm Prediction Center had that. What was very different about those is that in my 30-plus years of working here, I don't ever remember basically sunrise tornadoes hitting the Tallahassee area. We've seen some farther north into South Georgia that happened overnight into the daylight hours, but typically right around sunrise is a really rare time for our part of the country to see severe weather.
Right.
It usually, if it's going to happen overnight, it would usually be at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then by 7, everything's cooled down in more ways than one, and so you don't get the severe weather. So I think that was the bigger surprise, was that the timing of it. The atmosphere was ripe for it, but I don't think anyone said, I think there might be a tornado outbreak at 7 in the morning. That just doesn't happen, or it hadn't up until the May 10th tornado outbreak.
Yeah, that was scary. All right, I want to take a step back in your career path here and come back to college for a minute. Okay. We had mentioned it a little bit before, but that's how you and I know each other. We had met in the Marching Chiefs in the early, mid-'80s. We didn't know each other that well, really, because you were a member of Big 8, the drumline, and you didn't always hang out with the lowly wind players that much. Big 8 were kind of the cool kids and had your kind of own culture. That's fair to say, right? That's fair.
Now Big 8 was big. And it wasn't 8 members, for anyone that doesn't know.
A lot bigger than 8.
We actually had about 30 by the time you add in, the snares, the basses, the tritoms, Latin section, which is what I played the first couple of years, and cymbals. But it was a family.
So you guys came early, you practiced separately.
We're playing drums. It's
a whole other thing.
If you said come 2 hours early, we'd say, all right.
Yeah, I would have a hard time getting the French horn section to agree to that. I would agree.
If we had an opportunity to play drums, we all said yes. Right. And drumming, I didn't play any other instruments. I mean, I played a little bit of piano, kind of a little bit growing up, but it was mainly just drums. So I can't speak for other instruments as far as the culture goes. But I know that drumming is a culture. And I thought, talking about air drumming and knowing all the parts to Rush songs. When I got to FSU, and let me just say, again, I didn't know anything about the Marching Chiefs. I knew that FSU had a band, and I wanted to be in it because I had been in it in high school.
So you didn't know it was literally one of the best marching bands in the country?
No idea.
Maybe the best.
I had no idea. I knew that I wanted to play drums, and so I got the information about tryouts.
Which is no joke.
Right, which was kind of scary because I thought I was a good drummer, and then I realized, holy cow, I'm literally like the bottom 10% of all of these people.
Right, because most of them all played like center snare in their high school or something, right?
Right, and I did. I was drum captain, and I thought I was hot stuff, and I mean, my chops were ridiculously low compared to what I was seeing in front of me. And it was one of our good friends, Joe Tedder.
Yep, Joe.
Said he was a percussion coordinator, which is fancy way for saying section leader. And he sent me the letter about tryouts, and so I went and tried out. Played the stuff that I played in high school, which, again, I thought it was good, but I realized almost immediately watching these other people trying out and everything, oh my God, I might not make the section at all.
Right.
I thought
you were trying out for snare.
Right. That's what I played in high school. I
Right.
just thought that's what I would do. But they had pity on me and gave me an opportunity to see if I could learn enough to play in the Latin section. And that's Big 8 had timbales and bongos that marched
Right.
back then.
Yeah, well, we need to take a step back there. So you had one particular friend in Big 8, right?
Yeah. So the first 2 years I played Latin, played bongos. And so in 1985, I switched to playing tritoms, the 3 drums. And my chops were getting better. Now I was kind of maybe in the middle of the road as far as talent goes, because I was playing all the time. But one of the gunkies, and that's, for those that don't know, gunkies are what we called the incoming new members of Marching Chiefs.
Yeah, they're not allowed to say that anymore. I don't know why, but
it's sad that they don't. But
yes, they don't have skit night either. They don't do any of that stuff.
I mean, I understand some of the things because
Yeah,
it's not PC anymore to do a lot of the stuff that we did back
Yeah.
then. But the gunky, as my understanding, is that they're new and they literally gunk up the
gunk
works.
it up, yeah.
Right. So it wasn't a derogatory term. It was because you're new and you don't know what to do yet.
right,
And so but everyone refers to it as their gunky year.
right.
So one of the new Big 8 gunkies was a girl named Mallory Deering. And she was playing top bass, the smallest bass drum. Local girl, went to Leon High School, played in the band there. One of her best friends is Trent Robinson, who became a timbale player.
Yeah.
So he was playing Latin. So he was in a section that I had been in. And so but it's Big 8. We're all family. I mean, literally, we go on trips together. We would go to Mexico Beach and rent a house for a weekend, all of Big 8. I don't know what sane person would rent to a bunch of drummers, but they did.
At least not more than once.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
But so we would actually vacation together as a group. So it truly was a family. So Mallory and I, she was in the bass section, so we didn't play the same instruments, but everybody was close within Big 8. We became good friends. She was a high school tennis player, a really good one.
Oh,
I was an okay one. She was a really good one. So in the off season, we would play tennis together. And so we'd see each other all the time in Big 8, and then we started playing tennis together and just became really good friends for a couple of years. And in 1987, I was like, let's see if this goes any further. And so we started dating. So we had already been friends for 2 years before we ever dated.
wow.
But we were still in Big 8, and it was going really well. In fact, you were gone by 87, correct?
Yeah, I did 82, 80, 83, 84, 85.
Okay. So in 87, literally probably a week or two maybe after we had actually gone out as more than just friends, Mallory and Trent were running across the median between Chiefs Field and Tully Gym
Okay.
on a water break. And I heard this awful sound, and I thought, oh, somebody got hit on a bike. No, what happened was she was running across and didn't see a car coming down that road and got hit. So she went off the bumper and went headfirst into the windshield, and that was the sound that I heard. It was literally her head hitting the windshield of this car. And so I went over to see because I just thought someone got hit. I want to see if it was, I don't know if I was just going to rubberneck or what. But then I realized that it was her laying on the ground in front of the car with significant injuries.
Yeah.
So I was in a little bit of panic mode. Ambulance came, but she was in a lot of pain, but she appeared to be okay considering what happened.
Yeah.
I rode in the ambulance with her to TMH. I still remember her mom at the emergency room, and I kind of mouthed to her from inside the ambulance, she's okay. And no broken bones. Just an absolute miracle. But she had a concussion. I mean, her head went into the windshield.
Yeah.
But then she was fine. It was, you talk about a miracle. You know, she got hit by a car head first in the windshield, and you know, it was a lot of recovery as far as the skin on her face, but she just dealt with it. She's the toughest woman I know, and it's those things in kind of life that you kind of feel like, well, there's something special here, and we both move in kind of slow motion. We didn't get married until 1996, so we actually dated for 9 years before we got married.
Okay.
But we were, it wasn't broken, so we weren't going to fix it type of thing. So
right. You have 3 sons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 sons that are, as of the time of this recording, all still in college.
Okay.
So it's been an interesting couple of years to have all 3 boys in college at the same time.
Yeah.
My oldest, Jack, is in graduate school. He's at Washington University in St. Louis. And my middle son, Davis, is in graduate school at FSU.
Okay.
So he's the first of all of our children to attend FSU. We didn't want them to go to FSU because we wanted them to go away and get the college experience.
Sure.
We didn't want them to live at home and, as Mallory would say, make it 13th grade. You need to get the experience.
Right.
You need to grow up and make the friends and do all the things that college students should do.
Right.
So Davis is at FSU.
Okay.
And he's in graduate school. And then my youngest son, Wilson, is at UCF.
Nice.
So all very different career path possibilities. None of them want to be meteorologists, and I'm glad, because meteorology is a science and a profession. You either love it and you're really into it, or you just don't understand how anyone could love it.
Right.
Which I totally get, and that's fine.
After about 5 years or so in Tampa, you end up back in Tallahassee at WCTV. How did that happen?
So Mallory and I were living in South Tampa at the time in this little tiny 11th story old condo building, and she got a call from her dad. Her parents lived in Tallahassee, and said, "Tell Michael." She calls me Michael. She said that her dad called and said, "Tell Michael that Mike Rucker is leaving Channel 6 in Tallahassee."
Legendary weatherman for a long time.
Right. He was here back in the 80s and 90s. And so this was in 1993. And I had grown in my position at WTVT, but it's such a really good station that nobody leaves. With Mike Rucker leaving to go work for the state, it opened up that job. I came up and applied for it, and Mike Smith was the news director.
Yeah.
And he hired me, and I was 28 years old, and I look back, and he took a chance on me then, because I kind of like the way with drums, I thought I was good, but then I realized, no, there are so many people that are so much better than you that you got to work hard at this. And so, but he took a chance on me, and Mallory loved living in Tampa because it was a different place for her. She grew up in Tallahassee, so she's like, "I'm going to go back to Tallahassee." I mean, even though she loves the city, she wasn't sure because she had been away from it. She kind of wanted to explore and live some other places. But she also realized this was a great opportunity for me, and it's still pretty good for her because she still had plenty of friends and family, so that there weren't too many downsides to coming back to Tallahassee. But when we came back, we both talked and said, this would be a stepping stone. Let's do this for a few years, and then we'll see what happens next. What happened was, after a few years, like this is a really good situation we're in, and then Jack was born in 2000. Once we started raising a family, it changed things.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute, this is a really good environment to raise a family. Her parents were here. We had grandparents. My parents were in Tampa, 4.5 hour drive away. So it's like, you know what? let's stick around a little while longer. Now, every once in a while, something would come up to where that's an interesting position. I'll apply for it or I'll consider it. I've had some interviews in other markets throughout the years, but after a while, especially after Davis was born and then Wilson was born, it's like, you know what? This is way too good of a thing to mess up by leaving for money, there's basically why I would have left at that point would be for more money.
Yeah.
When everything else was just perfect where I was. Like, well, this is a no-brainer. I love my job. I love where I live. My family's all happy and healthy.
Yeah.
Why take a chance and mess that up and move to a place to where you might be miserable?
Yeah. No, it's a good lesson for everybody.
Yeah, it wouldn't be better than what I had. So
Yeah.
that became a turning point as far as how long I was going to stick around.
Yeah. Right. So now and you can tell me what it was like then, but now you have a team of meteorologists and people. You're not only responsible for yourself, but a team of people who forecast and deliver the weather information to us. And as the top-rated news organization in the area, a lot of people rely on you in normal times and stressful, weather event approaching times as well. So from a leadership standpoint, tell us about how you transitioned into that and leading and building a team. And, you talked about Big 8 culture, creating your own meteorology department culture and kind of guiding the department.
It's different. I take a little more of a different approach. I've had lots of friends in the business, and certainly once social media came around and you could get exposure to other stations and the way that things are handled, I always kind of felt like getting the forecast right is the most important thing. So you want to be accurate. The way that you do it, your style, that should be you. It shouldn't be me.
Another version of you.
Right. I don't want them to do things like me. The things that we say are, you need to have a 7-day forecast. You need to have, if there's rain on radar, you show the radar, you show where it is, you show where it's going, and you show a forecast that shows some more information about that. How you handle the stuff in between is up to you, as long as you're just not going crazy and being some kind of weirdo.
Right.
Which we had one or two that I had to kind of say, look, what you said about the tropical threat was misleading. And the example I'm thinking of, he actually downplayed something that was too serious. Mm. Usually we're the other way. We've always been a no hype type of thing. And that's kind of something that I learned from Roy. He had kind of a lower key approach to things, but when it was serious, you could tell that it was serious. So the everyday thunderstorms, don't play them up like they're all going to produce tornadoes, because they don't.
Right.
It's every hurricane that forms in the Atlantic is not going to come here. We're not going to. Now, we didn't have the same models that we have today, so we didn't show a 10-day forecast on Twitter to frighten people.
Right.
But that's a lot of what's happening out there. So if there's any kind of guidance I give when new hires come in, is that you're not going to scare people. You're going to inform people. Right. And you're going to be the voice of calm and the voice of reason that people can turn to when it gets really nasty. They want to hear that kind of person. They don't want to hear someone that freaks out every time something might happen, because it's truly crying wolf. After a while, they won't watch you.
Right.
If I get scared on the air, it's because, holy cow, this is a big freaking deal.
Right.
And I've only had one time when I was scared on the air because there was a verified tornado. It was coming across north side of Tallahassee, and it had basically crossed over Meridian Road, and it was headed in the direction of Thomasville Road. I could tell by looking at radar that this was maybe a half a mile from my house, but I'm at work. I can't call my family because I'm live on the air. So on air, I said, anybody out there that knows my wife, can you please just call her and make sure that they're all huddled up in the hallway, because this is going to be really close to our house. She got like 10 phone calls within a minute.
Yeah.
And so, but even now, I get a little choked up thinking about that.
Very helpless, right?
I had to help my family, but I'm helping everybody else too at the same time. So the best way that I had to do that was on the air say, please call them, make sure they're safe, and then I moved on.
Yeah.
I don't have time to take a 2-minute break and call my family when there are other families that are just as much danger. So,
yeah. How scary.
But I still get comments, and that was several years ago. People remember that moment because I humanized it. That wasn't my intent. My intent was to keep my family safe, but people remember that.
Right.
And that's, I'd say, the only other time that I got, and we've had some bad weather events. We've had some really awful ones.
Yeah.
The hurricanes, while they affect so many more people, it's the ones that are the short fuse events, the tornado events, that by far the worst night of my life and professionally was when the tornadoes went through South Georgia back in January of 2017. It was happening at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And even though we tried to warn people this could happen, those overnight events are always the scariest for a meteorologist because you don't know if anyone's getting the information.
Right.
And we try to tell people, make sure that, with your phones now, you can get the alerts, but if the volume's down, you won't hear it. We always tell people to get a NOAA weather radio, and you can program them now to where they only go off if it's for your county, so you don't hear all the other ones that are 100 miles away. But making sure people have a way to get warnings if we think there's a threat overnight.
Right.
And so there was this tornado outbreak going through South Georgia, and I'm trying to warn people, but I just know that people are asleep. And I'm telling people, call them. If you know someone that's in this town or this town, call them, wake them up. But still, we had a lot of fatalities that night. And, no matter how much we tried to do, it was just a horrible situation. And to this day, we're talking more than 7 years later, it still hurts. That's, I'll go on topic, but a little bit off topic a little bit. Mental health for meteorologists can be a problem because things like that, where you kind of feel helpless and you're trying to warn people. But there have been a lot of issues in TV and out of TV. A lot of it is because of people, and I'm not saying the jokes aren't funny. I've heard them all. Believe me, I've heard every weather joke. Nothing is going to be new that you tell me. And I'm offended, but it doesn't bother me. It truly doesn't bother me when people say, I wish I could be wrong half the time and still get paid. That's what we hear. And I still, I'll hear that half a dozen times a year from somebody.
Sure.
But they're trying to be funny and they're not trying to be mean.
Right.
It's so I don't take it the wrong way. Now there are some people that every time a forecast goes wrong, then they go on their tough guy social media keyboard warrior rants.
Right.
About how they could do better. By all means, give it your best shot. But the getting it wrong and feeling helpless, or getting it right and feeling helpless part of that wears you down sometimes.
Yeah.
And
people are making life or death decisions based on the information they're getting, or they're helpless because they didn't get the information and now they're vulnerable, right?
Right. And so, we take as many steps as we can to get the information out there, but sometimes it still doesn't work. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. And so that kind of wears on you when you feel like, what else could I have done? Is there something that I could have said or done earlier that evening or during the event which would have changed things?
So how do you reconcile that?
Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just internalize it and I try to learn from it of better ways to do it next time. But still, no matter how much you think you're prepared, there are a billion variables in weather.
Yeah.
And no matter
how do you reconcile that it's okay that you did your best and either things changed or they didn't and people were still hurt? that's not on you. Your job is to be as prepared as you can and deliver it the best way you can, right?
Yeah, I would say that intellectually, I know that. Emotionally, I'll never convince myself of that completely. I mean, there are good Facebook groups of broadcast meteorologists where we talk about this stuff frequently. And, thankfully, getting treatment for mental health has become a lot more mainstream and okay. It used to be such taboo to even talk about it.
Sure.
But now it's very common to open up a thread in our little private broadcast meteorologist group where they'll talk about, having a rough time. Now, a lot of times for meteorologists, especially in TV, a lot of it has to do with those early jobs because not only are you dealing with those types of things where you don't want to get things wrong, but if it's your first job, you may be in a small town that's 1,000 or 2,000 miles from home. You don't have friends. You're working weird shifts so your friends don't work the same times that you do because we don't work banker's hours.
Right.
And so that really piles up on someone who has to Uber on their off time to make enough money to pay their bills because they're in a small market not making enough money. So it's a lot piled on to especially the young people in the business. And so that's where the mental health thing gets some help. And so the community does help, and it's a lot easier to say, hey, I need to talk to somebody and kind of get this out of me. I'm older and probably more stubborn, I guess, but I still let some of that stuff obviously eat at me a little bit, but I try to learn from it and handle it better the next time so that I know what to do both for me and for the public.
Yeah. All right, Mike, looking back, what is the one thing or person that changed or altered the trajectory of your life to this point?
Professionally, it has to be Roy Leap because he was the guy I watched growing up, and then I got to work for him. So it can't get any better. I'm so lucky, so blessed to have the career path that I've had. But then personally, meeting Mallory through playing drums, that has led to my personal life being fantastic and wonderful and everything I could hope it to be. So those two people, they've absolutely been the pivot points for everything that's good.
Awesome. This podcast is named How I Got Here, so we talked about how you got to this point in your life. Where do you think here might be for you in 3 to 5 years from now?
Professionally, I hope to still be doing exactly what I'm doing right now. I truly still love going into work every day. Been here for more than 30 years and still love it. And they pay me to do it. So again, that's a pretty good life.
Yep.
Now, outside of family life, which, that would be visiting my sons wherever they are, I love being with my family.
Yeah.
But the side gig that I really want to do is I want to play drums again. I haven't played the drum set in decades.
Okay.
So if I could get some kind of a gig to where, I'm with an 80s cover band and I'm just sitting in and just playing every once in a while, even if it's once a month or every 6 months, that would be, if I could do anything besides being a weatherman, I would play drums in a band if I could get paid enough. But I know I'm not good enough to get paid enough, so I'll stick with my paying job. But if I could, and I've got some friends that are in local bands, and I've sat with them once or twice, just to play a song.
Yeah.
And they're in the kind of bands that I would want to be in, but
right.
They have a really good drummer.
Right.
They're not going to sacrifice somebody to give someone that's mediocre that can only be there half the time. So I know my limitations, but
that's your thing. If you could do that.
Yeah. In a perfect world, I would do weather during the week, and I would play drums on the weekends.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can subscribe at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. It really does make a difference. Thanks to my amazing staff at Fiore Communications, who pick up the slack while I'm working on these podcasts, and to Troy Bloom for composing our theme music. You can hear more of Troy's creations on Facebook and Instagram at Troy Bloom Music. To connect with the podcast or suggest a future guest, Follow us on social media or email us at podcast@fiorecommunications.com.